Picture the most important object in your life right now. Not your phone, not your car, not your house or your job, or any of the things that feel urgent at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. I mean the thing you actually cannot survive without. Food. A loaf of bread specifically. Because in the winter of 1788, on the flat wheat plains of northern France, a 4-pound loaf of bread was everything. It was breakfast, lunch and dinner. It was your children's lives. It was the thing men were willing to kill for and die for and riot in the streets for. And it cost 14.5 sous. 14.5 sous. When a farmhand earned 15 sous on a good day, on a day when there was work, which in January there wasn't. So do the math. Your entire day's wages, assuming you had a day's wages, buys you 1 loaf of bread. 1. Which feeds a family of 4 for about a day and a half if you're careful. Less if you're not. Nothing if you also need firewood, or salt, or anything else the human body requires to not die. Now imagine this is January, the worst January in 80 years. The river's been frozen solid for 3 weeks. The roads are ice. The temperature has been below -15 Celsius at night, which doesn't sound like much until you're sleeping in a house with walls that are mostly daub and straw, and one small fireplace that you cannot feed because wood costs money you don't have. And the harvest. Oh, the harvest. The harvest of 1788 was not a bad harvest. It was a disaster, a catastrophe of a scale that France hadn't seen in a generation. On July 13th, exactly 1 year before the Bastille fell, a hailstorm crossed a 200-kilometre swathe of France. The breadbasket of the nation, the Beauce, the Ile-de-France, Burgundy, Champagne. The hailstones were the size of plums. Some people said the size of eggs. They fell for hours. They stripped fields bare. They knocked fruit from trees, drove wheat into the mud, destroyed the work of an entire growing season in an afternoon. Then came the drought. And then the frost. Early, too early, before what little harvest remained could be brought in. So, crop failure, followed immediately by the worst winter in living memory. There's a term historians use for this. They call it a subsistence crisis, which is a very polite, very academic way of saying people are starving. A lot of people. Maybe 8 million people across France are, in this particular winter, existing somewhere on the spectrum between not eating enough and actively dying. And I make these history stories and I honestly never know if the people listening to them are doing so because they want to learn something, or because the sound of someone describing 18th century French poverty helps them fall asleep, which, you know, is a completely valid use of this content. Either way, we're here, you're here. Get comfortable. Because tonight, you're not going to hear about the guillotine. You're not going to hear about Versailles, or the Queen's hair, or the powder-wigged gentleman debating liberty and pamphlets. Tonight you're going to hear about a turnip, and a piece of bread that isn't really bread, and the smell of boiled bark, and what it feels like to be so cold that your hands stop working properly, and so hungry that you start to understand, in your bones and your stomach and the grinding headache behind your eyes, why people start pulling down granary doors with their bare hands. You're going to be Jean-Pierre Moreau, 23 years old, day labourer, son of a dead sharecropper, living in the village of Vrigny-le-Sec, on the flat plain south of Paris that people call the Beauce. Here we go, your eyes open. And for half a second, just half a second, you've forgotten everything. You're awake, it's dark, and there's nothing. Just consciousness without context. Then the cold hits. Not the cold you know from England, if you're English, or from a drafty bedroom, If you've ever complained about a drafty bedroom, I need you to understand this cold. This is January cold in a house that stopped being warm sometime in November and has not been warm since. Cold that has seeped through the walls and settled into the straw of the mattress beneath you. Cold that lives inside the blanket, inside your clothes, inside the very act of breathing, so that when you inhale, the air feels like swallowing something sharp. Your fingers are curled against your chest without you having decided to curl them. Your body made that decision in the night, trying to preserve whatever heat was left. Then, a second or two after the cold, the smell arrives. It's not a simple smell. Nothing about a peasant's house in 1788 is simple. There's the smoke first, old smoke, the kind that's soaked into the walls over years and years, that rises again every morning before the fire is lit, before the ash from last night is even properly cold. Ash and charcoal and the ghost of every fire that's burned in this room since before you were born. Under that, the animals smell. Because the two goats are in the corner, the way they are every winter night. That's not neglect. That's survival. The goat's body heat adds warmth to the room. You give the goat shelter. The goats give you warmth. It's a transaction that your grandfather's grandfather would have recognised, that farmers across France have been practising for centuries. It's also the reason the room smells like wet fur and hay and goat dung, and why every morning of every winter begins with this specific combination of odours that you've stopped noticing, except on the very first moment of waking. Underneath that, something sourish. Fermentation, maybe. The ceramic pot of leftover pottage from last night that's been sitting on the cold hearth. Turnips and water and the heel of the bread from 3 days ago, all stewing together in the pot that doesn't get properly washed because heating enough water to wash a pot is a luxury. And under all of it, the human smell. You, your mother, your sister, all of you sleeping in one room because one room is all there is. All of you unwashed because washing in winter costs water and warmth and effort that cannot be spared for anything that doesn't directly produce food. You smell like everyone else smells in January in Vrigny-le-Sec. You smell like the winter. Welcome to the Beauce, France. January 1789. You're lying on a straw mattress. 2 ticking bags of rye straw sewn shut, laid on a wooden platform raised 6 inches off the earthen floor, because 6 inches off the earthen floor is drier and warmer than on it. And on top of you there is 1 wool blanket that used to be thick and is now not. And on top of that your coat, because last winter you started sleeping in your coat, and you've never stopped. Your name is Jean-Pierre Moreau. You are 23 years old. Your father, René Moreau, died 4 years ago of a chest infection that started as a bad cough in December and was a funeral by February, leaving your mother Agnès and your sister Marie and your 12-year-old self and a sharecropping arrangement with the Vicomte de Brochard's estate that you were too young to maintain. The estate took the land back. Your mother negotiated them down to letting you stay in the cottage at the edge of the field. A mercy, she calls it. A mercy that cost 4 livres a year in rent, which does not sound like much until you understand what 4 livres means to a family that measures money in sous. Since your father died, you've been a journalier, a day labourer, which means you work other men's land for wages, when other men need extra hands, which in good years is often enough to eat. When the harvest comes in, the work is everywhere. Threshing, gleaning, carting. You can earn good money in August and September, enough to put something by for the lean months. But that was in good years. This is not a good year. This is the year after the hailstorm. The sound that wakes you is your mother moving. You can hear her across the room, the particular sound of Agnes Moreau getting up before dawn, which is its own kind of music if you've been listening to it your whole life. The soft creak of her knees, the way she breathes through her nose when the cold hits her, the shuffle of her feet on the earth floor feeling for her sabots in the dark. Your mother is 48 years old and looks older. 15 years of outdoor work. 4 children, of whom only 2 survived. One hard winter after another. They leave marks on a person. Her hands are the hands of someone 20 years beyond her age. The skin at her knuckles is cracked in 3 places right now. The cracks red and deep enough that they bleed a little in the cold. She rubs fat into them at night, when there's fat. When there isn't, she just endures. She's going to the fireplace to see if there's enough life left in last night's ashes to coax a flame without burning wood. Sometimes there is. This morning you hear the sound of her blowing on the coals, a steady, low sound, almost like a meditation, and then nothing, then again, then the soft crackle of a small flame catching on a piece of dried dung that's been saving by the hearth. Dung. Yes, mixed with straw and dried into cakes. It's slower than wood. It smells terrible. But it burns, and burning is the only thing that matters right now. You lie still for another minute. Not laziness, calculation. Every minute you stay under the coat and blanket is a minute you're not losing body heat to the room. Your body is the only furnace you have right now, and you feed it poorly, and you cannot waste its output. But the cold always wins eventually. You sit up. The floor is so cold through your wool stockings that it registers as something between sensation and pain. The kind of cold that isn't quite painful yet but tells you, clearly and politely, that it will be painful if you stand on it long enough. You stand on it anyway, cross to the fireplace where the dung cake is burning low and orange in the darkness. Your mother is crouched beside it, holding her hands out to the heat that isn't really there yet. Bread's almost gone, she says. She says it the way you say something you've been sitting with all night, not informing you, just releasing it. I know. There's the grain. The grain. Yes, there is grain. Or there was grain. There is what's left of the grain, which is 2 things. The small sack of rye that you've been rationing since October, and the seed grain. The precious, untouchable seed grain that is supposed to go back into the earth in March. Eating the seed grain is the choice that ends everything. Eat it and you survive the winter. Eat it and the spring planting doesn't happen. Eat it and you go into debt you may not be able to climb out of, trying to buy seed you can't afford from dealers who know exactly how desperate you are. We're not eating the seed grain, you say. Your mother doesn't answer. She already knew you'd say that. She's known you'd say that for months. She said it herself in November when you put the grain away, but it's January now, and the bread is almost gone, and she said it anyway. This is what hunger does. It makes you think things you know are wrong. It makes you say them out loud just to hear them back. Just to make sure the person across from you is still as resolved as you hoped. You are, for now. Morning in Vrigny-le-Sec does not begin with birds. It is too cold for birds. The birds left in October and haven't come back. The sparrows that usually flutter around the roof thatch are gone. The crows are gone. Even the hardiest of winter creatures, the robin that used to come to the kitchen window, stopped coming sometime in December, and you haven't seen it since. You hope it found somewhere warm. You genuinely hope this. It's strange, what you cling to in a bad winter. Morning begins instead with the sound of the village. First the Lefebvre dog, which never shuts up. Then old Père Gaudin across the lane, who has a cough that started in October and has gotten gradually steadily worse. A wet, deep cough that you can hear through 2 walls and 20 metres of frozen air. Then doors. People emerging from their houses to check the world, then retreating back inside. Footsteps on frozen mud. The creak and stamp of that. Then, if it's market day, the distant rumble of a cart on the Étampes road. If it's not market day, nothing. Just the wind, which in the Beauce is always there, because the Beauce is a plain, absolutely flat, absolutely exposed, stretching in every direction with nothing to break the wind except the occasional line of poplars that the old roads are lined with. And in January even those are bare, just skeletal black lines against a white sky that gives no warmth. You put the pot over the dung cake, in the pot, water. From the well, which you had to break ice to get to this, morning, using the iron rod you keep by the door for exactly this purpose. And in the water, turnips. Turnips are the thing, the main thing, the almost everything thing of this winter. I want you to understand what a turnip is in January 1789. Not as a vegetable you've seen in a soup or maybe roasted once at a pub. A turnip as the thing standing between your family and nothing. You put them in the ground in July, the turnips, right around the time the hailstorm was destroying everything else. Turnips are resilient. They grew through the drought and the early frost, partly underground, partly not. You pulled them in November and stored them in the root cellar under the house. Not a proper root cellar, just a hole in the ground lined with straw, covered with a wooden board and a layer of earth. And they are what you have. Turnips, some dried beans, some onions, though the onions are running low, some salt, though salt is taxed to the point where you buy it in small quantities, and use it carefully because the gabelle, the salt tax, means that what should cost almost nothing costs an unconscionable amount, and the salt tax inspectors, the gabellus, are among the most hated men in France. And the rye, the diminishing rye. Let the turnips cook. Sit beside the small fire. Try to warm your hands. Your sister Marie is awake now, sitting up on the bed in the corner, watching you from across the room. She's 16, Marie. The same dark eyes as your father. She doesn't say anything in the mornings. She just watches, taking stock of the situation, making her own calculations. This winter has made her older. You can see it in the way she sits. Something has tightened in her face. You wish she was somewhere else, somewhere warmer, somewhere with more food, but there's nowhere else. The bread. Let me tell you about the bread, because it is the centre of everything. In 1789, the average French labourer eats somewhere between 2 and 3 pounds of bread per day. Not because bread is all they want to eat, because bread is almost all there is to eat. Bread is calories. Bread is survival. Bread is the thing your body runs on. The bread of the poor is pain biz. Dark bread, made with rye or barley or a mix of both. Because wheat is expensive, because wheat goes to the cities, because wheat goes to the people who can afford wheat flour. Your bread is the colour of mud, dense, slightly bitter, and it fills your stomach in a way that lighter bread doesn't. When the grain is good, when the milling is good, pain biz is actually quite good. Sour and heavy and solid. A peasant with a full loaf of pain bis and a pot of soup is not rich, but they are fed. This winter, the bread is not pain bis. The bread your mother's been baking for the last 2 months is something that wears the shape of bread but is not quite bread. It contains rye flour. Yes, But the rye flour is mixed with bean flour because the rye has to be stretched, and the bean flour is mixed with bran, the rough outer husks of the grain that normally go to feed animals. And if there isn't enough of those, and sometimes there isn't, your mother adds powdered dried chestnuts from the small sack you bought in October, or powdered dried acorn that you gathered yourself from the oak stand behind the village, roasted slowly over the fire, ground with the stone hand mill that sits in the corner of the kitchen. What comes out of this is technically bread. It bakes. It forms a crust of sorts. It can be sliced, if you're gentle with the knife, but it sits in your stomach like clay. It causes a pain in your gut that's different from hunger, almost worse than hunger, a grinding heaviness that makes you want to double over. The bean flour especially. The acorn flour has a bitterness that no amount of baking removes, a tannin bitter that makes the inside of your mouth go dry. And it's rationed. Your mother cuts it in the morning, 1 piece each, 2 inches thick, 4 inches long. This is breakfast and this is lunch, because there's no midday meal when the bread is like this. There's the bread in the morning, and there's the turnip soup in the evening, and between those two things there is work and cold, and the sensation of your body burning through its reserves hour by hour. She cuts it this morning with the seriousness of a judge. You eat yours standing up, leaning against the wall near the fire, and you chew it slowly. This is also calculation. Slower chewing means the food sits in your mouth longer. Your body gets more signal. You feel more full for longer. It doesn't actually work that way. You know this, but you do it anyway. The bread taste of the rye, which is familiar, then of something else. The bean flour, slightly rancid, a ghost of rottenness. Then underneath both, the dry bitterness of the acorn. You eat every crumb. You run your finger along the inside of your palm where the bread was, pick up the last pieces. There's enough for maybe 5 more days, your mother says. I'm going to Bassart's today, you say. The miller. The Bassart mill is 2 kilometres outside the village, on the small creek that hasn't quite frozen solid, because the mill wheel keeps the water moving, though barely. Etienne Bassart has been the miller of this area for 20 years, taking over from his father, who took over from his father in the way that trades passed down in France. Millers are not popular people. This is historically universal. The miller sits at the intersection between grain and bread, which means he sits at the intersection between survival and starvation, and he knows it. And there is always a suspicion that he exploits his position more than he should. The miller takes a toll, a percentage of every batch of grain brought to him for milling. This is normal. This is how millers eat. But when grain is scarce, the toll feels different. When grain is scarce, and the miller's family is fat and his children have shoes, the toll feels like extortion. You're carrying the rye, not all of it, enough of it, enough to give you flour for another week or so, depending on the toll, depending on what Bassart takes. The sack is on your back, maybe 15 leaves of weight, and you're walking the 2 kilometres on a road that is ice over mud over more ice, using the stick your father made that you still carry, testing the ground in front of you with every step. The cold is total this morning, a white, clear, windless cold, which sounds like it would be better than cold with wind, and in one sense it is, but this kind of cold is deceptive. It's still. It feels almost gentle at first, but it bites into your exposed face with a consistent, patient pressure, and by the time you've been walking for 10 minutes, the tip of your nose has gone through the stage of hurting and into the stage of not feeling anything, which is its own kind of alarm signal. The boose in winter is the flattest, emptiest thing you've ever seen. You were born here. You've never left. This is the landscape of your whole life. In summer, in a good year, it's all wheat. Horizon to horizon, a gold sea that moves in the wind. People from outside say it's beautiful. You take their word for it. You know what it looks like in January, which is nothing. Frozen brown fields, stripped and empty, stretching away until they meet a horizon that offers nothing but more pale sky. There are crows on the frozen fields. You watch them as you walk. Black specks against the brown-white ground, moving slowly, jabbing at the frozen soil, looking for seeds that were hammered in by the hailstorm in July, looking for anything, finding almost nothing. Even the crows are hungry. You grip the sack tighter, adjust it on your shoulder, keep walking. The creek comes into view first, a black line of moving water in the middle of a white landscape. Then the mill, the wooden wheel barely turning, slow enough that you can see each paddle, individually as it lifts out of the water and drops back in. The splash it makes is small and sounds wrong in all this silence. The mill door is open. Smoke rises from the chimney. Bassart is working. Etienne Bassart is a wide man, not fat, not in the way you might think of a prosperous man, but wide in the shoulders, wide in the face, with large red hands and a permanent flour dusting on his clothes that makes him look vaguely ghostly. He's somewhere in his late 40s. His eyes are quick and very pale blue, the colour of frozen water. He's grinding when you come in. Not your grain, someone else's, a small batch, one of the Guérin family probably, from the look of the sack propped against the wall. He glances at your sack, looks back at his work. Moreau. Morning. Rye? Rye, and a bit of barley, mixed. Can you do a mix? I can do whatever you bring me. A pause, the wheel grinds. The flour sifts down through the stone, fine and pale. Toll is a fifth. You feel it. In your stomach. A fifth. It was a sixth last month. Last month there was more grain coming through. Bassart keeps his eyes on the mechanism, adjusting something you can't see with the ease of long practice. Less grain, same overhead. My wheel still turns. My boys still eat. The toll's a fifth now. There it is. That's the logic of the miller. It has its own terrible sense. If fewer people can afford to have grain milled, he has to take more from each person who does. His costs don't shrink with the harvest failure. His family still needs to eat. And yet, a fifth means 1/5 of everything in that sack goes to Bassart. 1/5 of your week's flour. 1/5 of what's keeping your mother and sister alive. You do the calculation quickly, the way hunger teaches you to do arithmetic. If the sack contains enough grain for 7 days, a fifth toll takes more than a day's worth. You walk away with flour for 5.5 days instead of 7. Sixth, you say. Bassart shrugs. The shrug of a man with leverage. There's nobody forcing you to mill here. You can walk to the Pontieu mill if you like. That's 8 kilometres. You cannot walk 8 kilometres. Not on these roads. Not in this cold. Not with this sack and those hands. 6.5. You try. Just to try. Just so you've done everything you could. Bassart looks at you for the first time. Really looks. Takes in your coat, your hands, your face. Some quick internal accounting. A 6.5, he says. And you carry the Guérin sacks to the village when you go. I was going to send my boy with them, but he's got a cold. 2 sacks on top of your own, an extra 3 kilometres, but a 6.5 instead of a fifth. Done, you say. You put the sack down and wait for the Guérin grain to finish. The inside of the mill is the warmest place you've been in weeks. You stand near the door, not near the fire. That would be presuming on a hospitality that Bassart isn't exactly offering, but the mill generates its own heat through the grinding, through the machinery, through the sheer business of operation. You press your back against the wall and let the warmth soak into your coat. Your hands thaw. This is painful. The specific pain of blood returning to cold extremities. A deep, prickling ache that starts at the fingertips and moves inward, like someone pushing needles into the joints from the outside. You clench and unclench your fists. Keep moving the fingers. Frostbite is a real possibility this winter. You've already lost feeling in the tip of your left little finger. Not permanently, not yet, but it doesn't come back as quickly as it used to when you go outside in the morning. Bassart's youngest boy comes in carrying wood, a boy of maybe 9, round-faced, wearing a coat that fits him properly. His cheeks are red from the cold, but not hollowed, not thin, not the look you see on the children in the village, the look Marie is starting to get. The boy doesn't look at you, goes to the fire, deposits the wood, leaves. Bassart's family eats. That's what that look means. Bassart's family eats the toll, plate by plate, meal by meal, winter by winter. You don't hate him for it. That's the thing. You understand it. He has leverage, and he uses it, the way anyone uses what they have. You'd do the same. But understanding it doesn't make the sack any less light when he's done with it. The walk back is worse with 3 sacks. 2 Guerin sacks, your own flour. You've distributed them as evenly as you can, one on each shoulder, your own across the front, and the weight compresses you into the ground on every step, your feet punching through the ice crust into the mud beneath with a sound like breaking crockery. Your lower back begins to ache at the first kilometre. By the second kilometre, it has graduated from aching to a specific, insistent pain that rides the base of your spine with every footfall, a hot iron kind of pain that makes you walk slightly bent, which makes your hip hurt, which makes the whole thing worse. This is what winter in the Beauce does. It's not dramatic, it's not one terrible thing. It's the accumulation of small degradations, the cold and the hunger, and the weight and the pain, each thing small enough to endure by itself, all of them together wearing you down the way water wears down stone, slowly, constantly, without stopping. You stop once at the top of the small rise, the only rise for miles, just a gentle swell in the otherwise flat land, to rest the sacks and breathe. From here you can see Vrigny-le-Sec in its entirety. About 40 houses, maybe 200 people, a church with a small bell tower, the big farm of the Lefebvre family at the south end, the one that actually had a decent harvest this year because they lease more southern land, more sheltered from the worst of the hail. The row of small cottages along the main lane, smoke rising from most of them, thin grey. Smoke, careful smoke, the smoke of people burning as little as possible. The fields around the village are striped and frozen. Some of them have been winter ploughed, dark lines across the white, but not all. Some of them are just blank, untouched since the harvest came in, or didn't come in October. You can see from up here the full shape of the disaster. In a good year, those fields would all be winter wheat right now, green even in January barely, a few inches of growth before the hard frost sets it back. But you need seed to plant winter wheat, and this year's seed came from this year's grain, and this year's grain, never mind. You pick up the sacks, keep walking. The Guerin family takes their flour with the expression of people who are expecting it sooner. Marguerite Guerin, who is a sharp-faced woman of 35 with 4 children arranged behind her in the doorway like a staircase, says nothing. takes the sacks, closes the door. Not thank you, not a word. You understand this too. Your mother is in the kitchen when you get back. She's made the soup. Turnip soup again always. And the smell of it reaches you when you open the door. That particular smell that is simultaneously familiar and terrible. The thin smell of root vegetables boiling in water. The smell that means there is something to eat, but barely. You put the flour sack on the shelf. Tell her about the toll. She nods, her lips pressed together for just a moment. Then she goes back to the soup. Guillaume Lefebvre was here, she says. What did he want? To talk. He's going to Étampes tomorrow, market day. A pause. She stirs the pot. The turnip pieces move through the brown water, soft and formless. He says there's been trouble in the market square. What kind of trouble? She looks at you over her shoulder. Her eyes are careful. The bread kind, she says. Guillaume Lefebvre is 25 and angry. He has always been angry, in the way some people are, constitutionally suited to it. But this winter has made him something different. Focused. The anger has found a direction. He comes to collect you at dawn, stamping his feet in your doorway, wearing a coat that's in better condition than yours and wooden sabots that are new enough to still have their shape. His family fares better than most in Vrigny-le-Sec. They farm their own land. They had enough stored from previous good years to absorb some of this one's catastrophe. But Guillaume doesn't take comfort in that. He takes it as a reason to be angry on behalf of people who don't have what he has, which in this winter is most people. You're coming, he says. It isn't a question. What's in Étampes? Market and trouble, maybe. Maybe more than trouble. He grins. It's not a happy grin. The baker Charpentier has been selling at 30 sous the loaf. You stare at him. 30 sous. That's twice what it should be. I know. Come on. The road to Étampes is the old Roman road. Still the best road in the area because it's been there for 1700 years and the layers of history have compacted it into something solid. In summer it's hard and white. In winter it's hard and white in a different way. It runs straight as a string through the flat land, lined with poplars bare of leaves, the dark trunks making a colonnade of shadows that you walk through in the early morning light. There are other people on the road, a surprising number, mostly men, mostly walking, mostly in the grim, efficient way of people going somewhere because they have to, not because they want to. A farmer from the next village whose name you don't know. A family, mother, father, 2 children, on a cart with 1 horse that's so thin you can count its ribs from the road. A group of young men who might be from Moraine-Villiers or somewhere further east, walking fast, talking in low voices. Guillaume knows some of them, nods to a few, exchanges a word or two with a man named Bertrand, who is built like a barn door and has an expression like he's already been insulted by something. Is the whole plain come into market today, you ask? The whole plain is hungry, Guillaume says. Same thing. Étampes in winter. Let me tell you what a market town looks like in January 1789, when everyone within 30 kilometres is starving. The town square is bigger than your whole village. In the centre, the covered market, the halle, with its timber frame and tile roof where the stalls are. Around the edges, the baker's shops, the butcher, the chandler, the notary's office with its iron lock and its closed shutters, the church of Notre Dame beyond the square, old and slightly leaning, its gargoyles wearing crowns of ice, and the people. There are hundreds of them today. It's market day, yes, but this is not a normal market day crowd. This is something else. This is people who have come not just to buy, but to see, to hear, to check whether it's as bad as they've heard, to compare their situation to their neighbours and find, inevitably, that it's the same, that everyone is the same, that the hunger is everywhere and the cold is everywhere, and the bread prices are what they are, and there is no good news anywhere. The market stalls are sparse. In a normal January they'd be sparse because winter is always sparse, but today they're almost empty. Some dried beans, turnips of course, a few sacks of second-quality barley that look like they've been there since autumn, an old woman selling chestnuts by the cup, actual roasted chestnuts, hot, the smell of them extraordinary in the cold air, and the price of them extraordinary too, a sou for a small cup, and there's a line of people in front of her that stretches 10 metres down the lane. The butcher has pigs' trotters and ears. That's it. The trotters are in a barrel pickled. The ears are hanging from a hook, frozen solid, dark pink against the white air. No beef, no lamb, no chicken. Livestock have been dying all winter. The cold and the shortage of fodder. Farmers who had animals in October don't all have them anymore. And then, the baker. Charpentier's bakery is at the south end of the square, in a stone building that's been a bakery for longer than anyone can remember. You can smell it before you see it. Bread. Real bread. Wheat bread, apparently, which seems impossible, but the smell doesn't lie. Wheaten bread, warm from the oven, the smell of it hitting you like a physical thing, a wave of warmth and want that makes your stomach contract violently. There is a crowd around the door, not a buying crowd, something else. You push through with Guillaume, working your way to the front. People are packed in close enough that you can feel the body heat of the people around you, which in this cold is actually something. The smell of people's clothes and unwashed skin, overlaid with that impossible bread smell. The crowd is angry. Not screaming angry, not yet, but the temperature of it, the human temperature of it, is wrong. People are standing too still, talking too quietly. The stillness of a pot just before it boils. There's a man standing in front of the bakery door who isn't a baker. He's big, broader than Bertrand even, wearing a dark coat that suggests he's been placed there specifically to be seen. The Vicomte de Brochard's steward, Monsieur de Villiers. You recognise him. You've dealt with him. He handles the estate's business in town, including apparently standing in front of bakeries. The reason for this becomes clear when you hear what the people nearest the door are saying. The Vicomte has a contract with Charpentier for bread. This is not unusual. Wealthy men contract with bakers to supply their households. This is normal commerce, normal practice, the kind of arrangement that has existed in France for centuries. But this winter, Charpentier has been fulfilling the Vicomte's contract first. The Vicomte's bread goes out every morning, proper, wheaten bread, white bread, before anything is sold to anyone else. And what's left, the mixed grain loaves, the dark loaves, go to whoever can pay 30 sous for them, 30 sous. When a family in this square has maybe 15 sous to their name. Is there anything left? Guillaume asks a man near you. The man turns, old, maybe 60, with a face like old saddle leather and eyes sunk deep in their sockets. 2 loaves, they say. 2 loaves, and he wants 30 sous each. 30 sous, someone else echoes. The word moves through the crowd like a stone thrown in water. A woman near you starts to cry, silently, without drama. She's maybe 35, her hair pulled back under a linen cap that was white once, and she cries with the absolute exhaustion of someone who has been on the edge of this for weeks and has just reached the point where she can't hold it back anymore. You look at her. She doesn't look at you. Your stomach is making a sound. Just your stomach working through. The insufficient breakfast, looking for something that isn't there. The man at the door, de Villiers, watches the crowd with an expression you recognize. It's a calculation. The same calculation Bassett made. He knows he has leverage. He's waiting to see how the crowd uses its collective weight. This is wrong, Guillaume says, loudly, loud enough that the people around him turn. De Villiers' eyes move to Guillaume. The baker sells at a legal price, de Villiers says. His voice is even, practiced. The voice of a man who's explained things he considers obvious to people he considers beneath him, many times. The Vicomte's contract is legal. The grain purchase price is what it is. If you want bread at 15 sous, find a baker who can afford to sell at 15 sous. There's no baker who sells at 15 sous. There's no baker within... Guillaume stops, takes a breath, his hands at his sides, not quite fists. We have families to feed, as does the baker, as does everyone. The Vicomte de Brochard, says Bertrand, appearing from somewhere behind you, has grain in his barn that would feed this town for a month. A silence. De Villiers looks at Bertrand, the look of a man recalibrating. The Vicomte's grain, he says, is the Vicomte's property. In a time of famine, says a voice you don't recognize from the back of the crowd, grain is everyone's property. It comes from somewhere in the mass of people. It doesn't even sound like a declaration. It sounds like a statement of physics, like saying water flows downhill. The crowd around you shifts, not violently, just a collective adjustment, a pressure change. People moving slightly forward, the space between the crowd and the bakery door shrinking by inches. De Villiers sees it. You see him see it. His hand moves towards something inside his coat, and then nothing happens. Nothing happens, and nothing happens. And then a woman near the front, it's not the crying woman, a different woman, older, wearing a blue headscarf, reaches past the big steward and pushes the bakery door open. It's not a dramatic gesture. It's not violent. She simply reaches around him and pushes the door, and it opens because it isn't locked, and she walks in. De Villiers grabs for her arm, misses, looks back at the crowd. The crowd is moving. This is not the storming of the Bastille. I want to be clear about that. What happens in Étampes Market Square on this January morning is not revolution. It's hunger. There is no political manifesto here. There are no pamphlets, no philosophers, no elegant theories about the natural rights of man. There are hungry people, and there is bread, and there is a locked door that is now unlocked. You follow Guillaume through the door, not because you've decided to, because you're standing next to him when he moves, and you're hungry, and the smell of bread is inside that door, and your body makes the decision before your mind does. The bakery inside is hot. After weeks of cold, the heat of a professional oven is a physical shock, a wave of warmth so intense it almost pushes you back. The walls are dark with decades of smoke. The oven is built into the back wall, a massive stone structure that takes up a quarter of the room, its iron door closed but glowing faint red at the edges. Behind the counter, Charpentier himself, a small, round-shouldered man of 50 with flour on his apron and fear on his face, is backing toward the wall, holding a loaf in each hand as though he's considering whether bread could be used as a weapon. The woman in the blue headscarf is already at the counter. The price is 15 sous, she says. Not a request, a statement. I can't, Charpentier starts. We know what your flour costs, she says. We know what your wood costs, your ovens, your time. 15 sous gives you a margin. A man behind you laughs, a short, sharp sound. She's right. My father was a baker. Charpentier looks around. There are 30 people in his shop now. 40. More pushing in from the door. His hands are shaking. You can see it from where you're standing. The loaves trembling slightly in his grip. You feel sorry for him. This is the thing that surprises you, standing in this moment. You feel sorry for this man. He didn't create the harvest failure. He didn't create the winter. He's buying grain at the prices he has to pay and selling at the prices that let him survive. But those 2 loaves in his hands while the crying woman stands outside in the cold. Charpentier puts the loaves on the counter. 15 sous, he says. His voice cracks slightly on the second word. The woman in the blue headscarf reaches into her pocket and places 15 sous on the counter, one at a time, slowly, precisely. She takes the loaf, and this is, in some way, the real moment, not the door opening, not de Villiers grabbing for the woman's arm. This, a baker selling bread at a fair price because the alternative has filled his shop. With hungry people and a woman paying that fair price with coins she has counted out exactly. Not stealing, not rioting, just insisting on the arithmetic being correct. It's so small. It's everything. The rest of the crowd buys in turns. Some have money, some don't have quite enough. The woman in the blue headscarf, you never learn her name, buys the loaves where she can and distributes pieces at the door. There's a piece in your hand. You don't quite remember how it got there. Wheat bread. White bread. Bread you haven't tasted in months. The crust crackles when you press your thumb into it. The inside is white and soft and impossibly light compared to what you've been eating. You eat it in 4 bites standing in the doorway. You're not proud of this. You're not ashamed either. You just eat it, and the taste of it is so completely different from the dark clay bread at home that you stand there after the last bite just holding the warmth of it in your mouth, eyes closed, before the cold rushes back in and reminds you where you are. De Villiers is gone when you come back outside. Where he went, you don't know. To find the gendarmerie, probably, or to write a letter to the Vicomte, who is wintering in Paris, presumably in a house that has wood for the fire and bread that doesn't taste of bark and acorn. Guillaume finds you near the square's edge, leaning against the wall of the chandler's shop. "Well?" he says. "Well?" Nobody got hurt. This seems to surprise him slightly. Nobody got hurt, you agree. The bread was the right price, and everyone paid for it. He watches a cart making its way through the thinning crowd, one of the morning's market carts, almost empty now. That's not a riot. That's, he searches for the word, commerce. You think about the woman crying silently in the square. You think about Charpentier's shaking hands. You think about the piece of wheat bread that is right now the most recent food in your stomach and how your stomach immediately wants more. "Come on," you say. "I need to find turnips." Guillaume laughs, genuinely laughs, a real laugh that startles even him. "After all that," he says, "turnips." "I have a family," you say. "I need turnips." He's still laughing softly as you cross the square toward the market stalls. There is a hill on the eastern edge of Étampes. Not a dramatic hill. Not the kind of hill that has a name or a legend or a monument. Just a rise at the end of the Rue Saint-Martin, where the town ends and the fields begin. And if you climb it, takes maybe 5 minutes. You can see the Beauce stretching out to the north, all the way to where the horizon blurs into haze and winter sky. You climb it because Guillaume has stopped to talk to Bertrand and 2 other men, and you need a minute away from the voices, and this is a direction where there are no voices. The top of the hill is cold and clean. The wind is there again. Always the wind. It comes out of the northeast today, off the frozen marshes somewhere far away, and it tastes of nothing, which is its own kind of purity. Cold and tasting of nothing except the air itself. You stand with your back to it, facing south, looking at France. The landscape is white and brown and grey. The frozen fields, the dormant earth, the bare poplar lines that mark the Roman roads running toward Paris. Smoke rising from every chimney of every farmhouse you can see, and there are many farmhouses. This is the Beauce. This has been farmed since before there was a word for farming. And every chimney says people are in those houses, burning wood they can barely afford, trying to stay warm. From up here, the scale of the winter is comprehensible. In a way it isn't on the ground. On the ground you see your house, your lane, your village. You see your specific problem. You see the individual lack. Up here, you see the entire emptiness of the fields. You see that there is no harvest in those fields, and won't be for months, and that between now and March, every single family visible from this hilltop is working through whatever they stored in October at a rate dictated by the cold and by the size of their families and by the price of bread in Etampes market square. You can see Paris from here. Well, not the city, but the direction. North, slightly east, a smear of darker sky above the horizon that might be coal smoke and might be imagination. 40 kilometres, 2 days' walk. Paris has more grain than the Beauce right now. Not because Paris is richer, though it is, but because the intendant, the royal administrator who controls grain distribution in the region, has been directing supplies toward the capital. The government fears Paris. Paris has more people in one place. Paris is where things happen when they go wrong. So the grain moves toward Paris. And the Beauce starves. You've heard this from a man who works for the grain merchants in Etampes. Heard it the way you hear most things that don't. Make sense with a dull, grinding anger that has no place to go. The government isn't doing it out of cruelty. They're doing it out of fear. They've been doing it for decades, but the effect is the same. You stand there for a while, long enough for the wind to make your cheeks ache, long enough for your feet, still from walking, to start their complaint. Down below, Guillaume is still talking. The sound of voices rises up to you without words. You think about the woman in the blue headscarf. You think about the 15 sous going onto the counter, one by one. You think about Charpentier putting the loaves down. You don't know this yet, standing on this hill in January 1789, but what happened today in Etampes is happening in 300 places in France right now. In markets across Normandy and Burgundy and the Loire and the Ile-de-France, in flour mills and grain stores and bakeries. The same scene, 1,000 variations of it playing out on the same winter days. Nobody is coordinating this. Nobody has organised it. There are no pamphlets directing people to their local bakeries to insist on fair prices. It's just hunger distributed evenly across a country, making the same logic obvious to 3 million people at the same time. The logic being, we will not starve quietly. You don't think of it as history standing on the hill. You think of it as a cold afternoon and a piece of wheat bread and the problem of getting home before dark. But it is history. It will be history. In 6 months the Bastille will fall. In 2 years the king will be trying to flee the country. In 4 years he will be dead. In 6 years thousands of the noblemen who held the contracts on the grain will be dead. In 30 years, the entire map of Europe will have changed. All of it growing from this winter, from these fields, from this specific hunger that is making your stomach cramp right now on the cold hill above Étampes. History always starts somewhere ordinary. This is where it starts. Jean-Pierre, Guillaume's voice from below. We're going. You take one more look, north, toward the darker sky. Then you turn and go down the hill. The walk home takes longer than the walk in. It always does. The energy of the morning, the crowd, the bread, the scene at the bakery Hague has burned off now, and what's left is just your body, carrying the turnips you managed to buy at the market, plus the weight of the morning, plus the weight of the week, plus the weight of the winter, back along the Roman road in the failing afternoon light. Guillaume talks. He's full of it today. The bakery, what Bertrand said, what should happen next, what the village should do. You mostly listen. Your feet hurt. Your back, which hurt all the way to Étampes under the flour sacks, has settled into a steady throb that moves with your footsteps. Your fingers, inside your coat's thin gloves, are cold again. They were warm at the bakery. They didn't stay warm long. The turnips are heavy. They're good turnips, actually. This you can tell even through the sack. Solid, dense, not hollow, not frozen through. Whoever grew them knows what they're doing, or got lucky with the weather, or both. 4 leaves of turnips bought with the money you had set aside for a piece of salt which you didn't buy, which you'll deal with later. Salt and turnips. These are the decisions of the winter. Salt or turnips. Wood or salt. Bread or everything else. The light is going. The low winter sun has already touched the horizon and is losing interest quickly. The Beauce in January goes from cold and bright to cold and grey in an hour, and then from cold and grey to dark in another half hour. And the dark in this landscape is serious dark. No lanterns on the road, no candles in the farmhouses you pass visible from here. You're quiet, Guillaume says. I'm tired. We did a good thing today. You think about Charpentier shaking. You think about de Villiers grabbing for the woman's arm. We got bread at a fair price, you say. We're going to be hungry again by Thursday. Well, yes. Guillaume walks for a moment. But so is everyone. And at least we know we can... He searches for how to say it. Push back. Push back. Maybe. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's what today was. You shift the turnip sack to your other shoulder. The village lights appear ahead. Candles as windows, yellow against the blue dark sky. Almost home. Your mother doesn't ask about Étampes. She sees your face and the turnips, and something in how you're standing. She asks about the turnips. You tell her about the price, the quality, how many days they'll last. She nods. She goes back to the stove. Maria's at the table, sitting close to the candle, working on a piece of mending. The candlelight makes her face softer than the daylight does, fills in the shadows, gives her back the look she had when she was younger, before this winter started doing its work. She looks at when you come in. Was there bread? She asks. I had a piece. Her eyes don't change. Don't show envy or judgment. Just register it the way you register all information in a winter like this, neutrally, as a fact. Was it good? Yes, you say. It was very good. She nods once, goes back to the mending. You sit by the fire, such as it is. The dung cake has been replaced by a small piece of wood that your mother must have found somewhere. A piece of timber scraps that's been saving for a special occasion, burning now with a real wood smell that is almost luxurious in this house. The warmth from it reaches you where you sit. You hold your hands out. The throbbing in your left little finger starts. The frostbite thing. blood coming back in. You clench and unclench the hand slowly, watching the finger. Still moves, still attached. Small victories. Supper is the turnip soup, with the turnips from today, and there are so many turnips that the soup is almost thick. Your mother has added a little salt, precious, rationed salt, and the difference it makes is remarkable. The soup tastes like something, not like a great deal, but like something, like a meal rather than just hot water with vegetables. And there is bread, the bread from home, the dark clay bread. But there's enough of it tonight, with the new flour from Bazaar, that the pieces are a full 3 inches thick, and you eat yours in small bites and try to taste each one. Nobody talks much at supper. This is winter table manners. You eat, you conserve, you don't perform conversation you don't have energy for. But at the end, when the bowls are cleared, your mother reaches behind the loose stone in the chimney breast and takes out a small pottery bottle. You stare at it. Calvados, she says. Your father's. I've been saving it since he died. Marie's eyebrows go up. Tonight, you ask? Your mother looks at you. Her eyes have something in them you haven't seen for a while. You went to market. You brought back turnips. And from the look of you, something else happened that I won't ask about. She sets 3 small cups on the table. Tonight, she pours. A finger's width each, amber in the candlelight, smelling of apples and fire and thyme. You take the cup. Your father bought this bottle from a travelling man who came through the Beauce one August, years ago. You remember the transaction vaguely. The amber liquid, your father negotiating with the cheerful efficiency of a man who knows exactly what he wants. You were 10 years old. The Calvados taste of that August. Warm apples and the distant burn of alcohol and something you can't name. Something that is just the taste of things that no longer exist. Of a time before this winter, before the harvest failure, before the grinding weight of everything. Your mother holds her cup for a moment. Renee, she says, your father's name. You don't say anything. You drink. The warmth of it moves through your chest. Immediately, radiantly. The best warmth in this house in 3 months. Mary makes a face at the taste, and then, carefully, drinks the rest. You sit together in the candlelight while the fire burns down and the village outside settles into its cold, dark evening. The next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. This is the rhythm of the winter, and it doesn't change. You wake in the cold. You eat the bread that isn't quite bread. You drink the soup that isn't quite soup. You work, whatever work there is. Hauling wood for a neighbour, mending a fence for the Lefebvre farm, carrying messages to the next village when the cold is survivable and someone pays you to do it. You do not earn enough. This is constant. You do not earn enough. The sums at the end of the day, when you're sitting by the fire and your mother has gone to bed and you're going through the week's accounting in your head, always come out wrong. Always leave a gap between what you spent and what you earned. A gap that's being filled by the grain stores, by the turnip stores, by the small amounts that are left in the strongbox under the floorboard. The strongbox under the floorboard, not your strongbox. The house came with it when your father negotiated the tenancy. A small iron-bound box with a key that lives on a cord around your mother's neck. Inside, this week's coins, last week's coins, a letter of tenancy that you cannot read because you were not taught to read, but that you know says roughly what your mother has told you it says. The amount of the rent, the terms, the name of the Vicomte de Brochard in his notary's French, and a small piece of cloth, folded carefully, inside the cloth your father's ring, which your mother took off his finger when he died and put here. Not gold, brass probably, but it has his particular dent in it where his big knuckle pressed against it for 20 years. Some mornings, when you're checking the box and your mother is asleep, you take out the cloth and unfold it. Look at the ring. Fold the cloth back up. He would know what to do. Maybe you've told yourself this story enough that it's become comfortable. Your father would know. Your father would have a plan. But your father also died of a cough in a winter not much colder than this one. And maybe his plan wasn't so different from yours, which is to get through it day by day and hope that spring comes before the grain runs out. Let me tell you about what you eat in a week. Because this is a story about food, and the honest truth is that in January 1789 on the Beauce, the list of foods available to a family like yours is so short that going through it takes less time than you'd think. Monday, turnip soup with barley bread and 1 onion. The bread is thick because it's Monday and the new flour is fresh. You eat well relative to the other days. Tuesday, turnip soup again. Bread thinner. You find, cleaning out the storage cellar, 3 dried beans that had rolled into a crack in the floor. You add them to the soup. They're hard as pebbles. They stay hard through an hour of cooking. You eat them anyway because your mouth likes having something to chew. Wednesday. This is the worst day of the average week in this particular winter, for a reason you couldn't have predicted. The flour from Bassart, which seemed fine when you ground it and fine when your mother mixed it, has developed a smell. Not a strong smell, just a hint. A slight sourness that isn't the normal sourness of rye. Your mother looks at it, looks at you. Neither of you says the word mould. She bakes it anyway. At the right temperature long enough, most things are safe enough to eat. Probably. The bread that comes out is darker than usual and has a slight off-taste that you identify and consciously decide not to think about. You eat it. Everyone eats it. Nobody gets sick. This time. Thursday. Guillaume Lefebvre's mother sends over a small pot of drippings. Rendered pork fat, what's left after. They've rendered a pig that died in the cold. The Lefebvre can afford to lose a pig in the cold and still eat. Most people can't. The drippings change everything. You spread the fat on the bread, thick, and the fat does something to the bread that transforms it, makes it richer, coats the bitterness, makes each bite take longer, slide more slowly down. You eat 2 pieces instead of 1, and you can hear your own stomach in the silence responding with something close to gratitude. Your mother saves half the drippings for Saturday. Friday, thin, watery soup, thin bread, the end of the week and the end of the stores, and waiting for Saturday when there might be market, might be something new in the house. Saturday, you go to the weekly village market, which in January is a meagre thing. A handful of people with whatever they have to sell or trade standing in the cold in front of the church. One woman has eggs, 2 eggs. From chickens she's managed to keep alive and laying somehow. 2 small pale eggs that she's selling for 3 sous each. 3 sous for an egg is insane. 3 sous for an egg is a thing that would make you laugh in a normal year. You know this. You buy one. You carry it home like it's made of glass. It is, in a way. It's made of protein, which is a luxury. It's made of fat and protein and everything your body has been missing for weeks. Your mother fries it in the last of the drippings. The sound of it in the pan, that particular sizzle, the specific smell of frying egg. It fills the small kitchen with a richness that makes Marie close her eyes for a moment, just standing there breathing it in. You cut the egg in 3. You all eat your third in 3 bites. Sunday, you're supposed to go to church, to the Mass that Père Villeneuve says in the cold church, with his breath making clouds in the air, and the congregation sitting in their coats because there's no heat in the nave, and the stone floors draw cold up through your feet and into your legs. You go because your mother goes, and because not going would require an explanation. Père Villeneuve is a small man who has been the priest in Vrigny-le-Sec for 15 years, and he is doing something that you noticed this winter, something that you don't remember him doing before. In his sermons, which are simple, which have always been simple because he's not a complicated man, he talks about the situation, about the hunger, about what is owed, not politically, not in any way that would get him in trouble. But he says things like, the wealthy man who holds grain while his neighbour starves holds a debt before God that no amount of piety can discharge. The congregation listens to this very carefully. After Mass, old Père Gaudin, whose cough you've noticed has gotten deeper, wetter, more alarming, approaches your mother with a leather bag. Inside the bag, dried chestnuts, a large amount, more than you've seen in one place this winter. Enough for weeks of chestnut, flour to stretch the bread. My daughter sent them, Père Gaudin says. He has to stop between sentences to breathe. From Périgord, she married a man down there. A pause. The wet sound of the cough, controlled just barely. I can't eat them all. The shell's too hard for my teeth. Your mother tries to give him something in return. He won't take anything. I am old, Père Gaudin says. Simple, not sad, just a fact stated clearly. Let me be useful while I can. You walk home with the chestnuts. Your mother is very quiet. You don't ask what she's thinking. You know what she's thinking, the same thing you're thinking, which is that old Gaudin's cough is the kind of cough your father had, which is that the chestnuts are kindness, and kindness from someone who can't spare long is its own kind of grief. You don't say any of this out loud. You carry the chestnuts home. There is the question of the salt. I promised you salt, and I want to be honest about salt, because salt is one of the things that makes this winter different from a modern camping trip gone wrong. Salt is not just flavour. Salt preserves food. Without salt you cannot pickle, you cannot cure, you cannot make your dried vegetables and your bean stores last long enough. Without salt, food rots faster, and you eat it anyway because there's nothing else. But salt in France in 1789 is taxed to the point of cruelty. The gabelle, the salt tax, has existed in France in various forms since the 14th century. The government has a monopoly on salt distribution. You must buy your salt from a government depot at the government price, which is many times what salt would cost without the monopoly. You must buy a minimum amount each year, enough to satisfy the baseline requirement as set by the tax collectors, and pay the price, regardless of whether you actually need that much. In some regions, the price is different than in others. This has led for centuries to smuggling. Salt smugglers, faux sauniers, risk the galleys or worse, carrying contraband salt across internal borders to sell at lower prices. You're not a salt smuggler. You're a day labourer on the Beauce with too much to worry about already. But when you go to the salt depot in Étampes in January and count out the coins for the government-mandated minimum purchase, the specific feeling in your chest, the calculation of what else that money could have bought, the bread, the turnips, the wood, is a feeling that has a French word for it that everyone in France knows in 1789. The word is injustice, not rage, not despair. Just the clean, cold, mathematical certainty that the arrangement is wrong, that it has always been wrong, that everyone has always known it's wrong. and that somehow the knowing it and the being unable to do anything about it have existed together all this time, a weight that is just part of what life weighs. You carry your salt home in a small leather pouch. Your mother opens the pouch, pinches a tiny amount, drops it into the soup. The soup improves. This is the bargain. February arrives. The cold does not leave with January. If anything, February is worse in the particular way that the second month of something is worse. You've used up the first month resources, you've used up the first month resilience, and you're facing the same thing again without the novelty of it being new. The turnips are running low. You've been careful. Your mother has been careful. But there are only so many ways to stretch a root vegetable, and you are reaching the end of them. The acorn flour which you ground in the autumn from the acorns you gathered in the oak stand adds its bitterness to everything. Every loaf of bread is a slight negotiation between the rye and the barley and the bean flour and the acorn, each ingredient bringing its own note, none of them quite right, all of them together making something that is technically food. Your gums bleed a little in the mornings. You've noticed this for 2 weeks, not constantly. Just sometimes when you run your tongue over them, a faint metallic taste that is there and then not there. You know what it is. You don't have a name for it. Scurvy is a sailor's disease, you think, or was it? But you know it's a deficiency of something green. Your body has been telling you for weeks that it wants something it isn't getting. In the oak stand in February there is almost nothing. The hazel hasn't budded yet. The nettles are still below ground. There's nothing green. You find watercress. Near the creek, where the water moves too fast to freeze completely, there is a patch of watercress growing in the slow water at the edge. Small, dark green, fragile looking in the cold. You pull a handful free, the stems snapping off cleanly in the cold water. Your fingers going numb within 30 seconds. The pain in your fingers walking home is remarkable. Your hands inside your coat pressed against your stomach. For warmth, the watercress a wet bundle against your shirt. You eat the watercress raw because cooking destroys something in it. You've heard this. Your mother has said this. And raw watercress in February tastes bitter and cold and of mud. And also, beneath all of that, of something green and alive that is so different from everything you've been eating, that it registers somewhere beneath taste, at the level of sheer biological need. The gum bleeding stops after 3 days of watercress. You go back to the creek every morning for a week. Père Godin dies on the 14th of February, in the night, quietly. His housekeeper finds him in the morning still in bed, as though he just didn't wake up. The cough, the one that's been getting worse since November, just stopped. He stopped. The church bell rings in the morning. One bell, slow, the village death toll. Everyone knows what it means. When they see who it is, some people cry. Old Godin had been a part of the village since before most of them were born. He was already old when they were children. He has buried their parents, their children, their spouses. He is buried 3 days later in the churchyard, in the frozen ground that takes 3 men and half a day with iron picks to open enough for the coffin. The ground gives up its dead but does not give up its frozen soil easily. At the funeral, Père Villeneuve speaks. He talks about life and death and the cold and God's mercy. He talks about the acts of kindness that Godin performed at the end of his life. He does not mention the chestnuts by name, but your mother, standing beside you in the cold churchyard, presses her hands together in front of her, and you can see from the way she holds them that she's not just praying, she's saying thank you. After the burial, The village gathers in the church for warmth and to be together. Someone produces a bottle of rough wine. Someone else produces a small piece of hard cheese, the last of something. It passes around. Guillaume is there, subdued for once. He sits next to you on the cold stone bench and doesn't say anything political, just sits. He was a good man, Guillaume says eventually. He was. There'll be more of this. You don't answer, because yes, there will be more of this. The cold takes the old and the very young, and this winter there are children sick across the village, sick with things that aren't fatal in a good year when they're fed properly. Things that are closer to fatal now. You don't want to think about this. Spring is coming, you say instead. Guillaume looks at you. 6 weeks, you say. Maybe 8. The ground is already different. Yesterday morning the mud on the south side of the barn had thawed by noon. You look at your hands, the cracked skin on the knuckles, the frostbite line on the little finger. Slowly healing now, but still visible. I can feel it changing. Guillaume nods, not convinced, but willing to be told this. 6 weeks, he says. 6 weeks. March. Comes in cold and goes out warm. Not actually warm, but warmer. The kind of warmer that, after this winter, feels like summer. The kind of warmer that means the ice on the well breaks on its own in the morning instead of needing the iron rod. That means the mud in the lane thaws and stays thawed. That means the first green things appear at the edge of the fields. Not crops, not yet, but nettles and dock and the pale yellow first shoots of something unidentifiable in the margins of the ditches. You bring nettles home the first week of March. Your mother makes soup, nettle soup, which is a humble thing, a poor thing, the food of people who have run out of options. And yet this bowl of pale green liquid, slightly slimy, tasting of spring and greenness, and nothing sophisticated whatsoever, is the best thing you've eaten in 4 months. You eat 2 bowls, Marie eats 2 bowls, your mother eats 1 bowl slowly, watching you both, not saying anything, and her expression is the expression of someone who's been holding a weight for a long time, and is just now, for the first time in months, putting it down. The seed grain goes into the ground on the 20th of March. You've kept it. All of it. The whole winter, through every temptation and calculation and desperate moment at dawn, with the box open and the coins not adding up. You kept it. You, your mother, and the 2 Lefebvre boys who help with planting, working from sunrise to sunset on the field behind the cottage, turning the soil that has been frozen solid since November, the soil that gives under the plough now in a way that feels almost grateful, a rich dark turned earth smell rising as each furrow opens. The seed goes in. Rye, mostly. Some barley. A row of beans along the south edge. And potatoes. You bought the potato eyes in Étampes one afternoon in February from a man who'd gotten them from a man who'd gotten them from somewhere further south where potatoes have been grown for a generation. They're still new enough in the Beauce that people aren't sure about them. Not real food, some of the old ones say. A Spanish vegetable. But a Spanish vegetable that grows in poor soil, that resists frost better than wheat, that stores well and feeds a family through a winter. You plant the potatoes. The first green shoots come up in 3 weeks. Small, dark green, unmistakable. You check on them every day, sometimes twice. Your mother sees you doing this and says nothing. She just comes out to look with you. In April, a pamphlet arrives in Vrigny-le-Sec. You don't read it. You can't read it. But Guillaume reads it. His mother taught him. One of the things the Lefebvre family does that the Moreau family doesn't. And he reads it out in the evening at the widow Dupont's house, where people have gathered, the way people gather in villages when something is happening that needs to be heard together. The pamphlet is from Paris. There are going to be elections, the pamphlet says. The Estates General, the Great Assembly of France that hasn't met since 1614, is going to meet in May. And for the first time, the Third Estate, everyone who isn't a noble or a clergyman, which is everyone in this room, everyone in this village, will have representatives. And those representatives will carry cahiers de doléances, notebooks of grievances, a notebook of grievances. You think about this, a notebook where the grievances of the people of France will be written down and carried to Versailles and given to the king and his ministers. And someone, some official, some lawyer, some educated man who writes these things, will come to Vrigny-le-Sec and ask what the grievances are. The room is quiet when Guillaume finishes reading. Then the widow Dupont, who is 70 years old and has seen more winters than anyone else in this room and whose face gives nothing away, says, "Well, I have a list." And the room laughs. First once someone who couldn't help it, and then the others. The list. The widow Dupont's list of grievances. The gabelle, the taille, the banalité, the corvée, the miller's toll, the bread price, the grain that goes to Paris, the cold that goes nowhere, the children who are smaller than they should be, the old men who don't wake up in February, the whole winter rolled into a notebook. Guillaume takes out a piece of paper. He starts writing. You watch him write. The pen moving across the paper, the words going down that you cannot read, but that you know contain everything. Everything this winter has been, everything it has taken. Your hands rest on your knees. The cracked skin is healing now, slowly. The frostbite line on the little finger is fading. The gums have stopped bleeding. Spring. The seeds are in the ground. This is the part of the story where, if it were a different kind of story, you'd get a resolution, a lesson, an arc that ties up neatly with what you learned and how you're different now. But this is a history, story, and history doesn't resolve. It just continues. You don't know, sitting in the widow Dupont's house listening to Guillaume write down grievances, that in 6 weeks the Third Estate will declare itself a national assembly, that in 10 weeks the Bastille will fall, that in 2 years there will be a constitutional monarchy, and in 4 a republic, and in 6 a terror, and in 8 a Napoleon. You don't know any of this. You know the potato shoots are up. You know the rye is showing green. You know the bread price in Étampes has come down from 30 sous to 22, and 22 is still too much, but it's better. You know that Père Gaudin's chestnuts lasted until February, and that without them the seed grain might not have made it. You know that the Calvados is gone. Drunk one small measure at a time on the hardest evenings, your father's last provision for the family now finished. You know that somewhere in Paris, a man named Emmanuel Joseph Sieyes has written a pamphlet that asks, "What is the Third Estate?" and answers, "Everything." You don't know about the pamphlet, but you know the answer. Everything. Everything is the Third Estate. Every cold morning and empty bread box. Every Bassart toll and Charpentier overcharge. Every frozen field and dead goat and child with hollowed cheeks. Every woman crying silently in a market square. Every old man's cough. Everything. The night before the ploughing season properly begins, you sit outside. This is new. A new thing you've done twice in the last week. This sitting outside in the evening. Because you can, now. Because the air is above freezing. Because after months of the house being the only viable space, the outdoors is reopened. You sit on the wooden bench your father made, which has been a snow perch since November, and is now just a bench again, against the south wall of the cottage. The wall holds warmth from the day's sun, actual warmth, real warmth, the first stored solar heat since September. You put your back to it and lean. The sky above the Beauce in April at night is remarkable. Once you've been away from cities for long enough, you forget that the sky can look like this. Enormous. Not just big, enormous, stretching from the flat horizon to the flat horizon. The stars between nothing and the next horizon overhead. The Milky Way actually visible on a clear night as a smear of light. Tonight is a clear night. You can see it all. The village is quiet behind you. A dog barking somewhere. A late candle in the Lefebvre house. The smell of turned earth from the fields. That particular smell that means spring. That means the year beginning again. That means things are growing. Your hands, resting on your knees, have healed. Almost. The deep cracks in the knuckles are gone. The frostbite line on the little finger is just a faint discoloration now, something you'd have to look for to notice. Your hands look like themselves again. Younger, which is strange after a winter that made you feel old. You're 23 years old. You've survived the worst winter in 80 years with your family intact, your seed grain planted, and more knowledge of how much a turnip is worth than you ever expected to accumulate. You think about the woman in the blue headscarf. You've thought about her often. You don't know her name. She stood in Charpentier's bakery and put 15 sous on the counter, one at a time, and said the price is 15 sous. And the baker, shaking, had put the bread down. You think about Père Gaudin and the bag of chestnuts. You think about the hill above Étampes and the smoke above the horizon that might be Paris. You think about the notebook, Guillaume's notebook of grievances written out, which will join hundreds of other notebooks, thousands, all going to Versailles. A government that ignores a hailstorm can't ignore 1,000 notebooks. Can it? You don't know. The night air is cool, but not cold. The difference between cool, but not cold, and cold is everything is difficult to explain until you've lived through a winter that only offered the second option. You stay outside until the candle in the Lefebvre house goes out. Then a little longer, the stars turn, slowly, the way they always have, the way they will long after this village and this winter and every person who suffered through it are gone from the earth. But they don't know you, the stars. You know them. You've been watching them all winter through the small window of the attic room on the nights when you couldn't sleep, the cold and the hunger between you and rest. Orion in the winter sky, moving slowly westward through the clear cold nights. The Pleiades, the steady pole star, they're still here. So are you. Let's stop here for a moment, because I want to tell you something about this winter that isn't about you specifically, about Jean-Pierre Moreau in Vrigny-le-Sec. It's about the whole. In the winter of 1788 to 1789, something like 1 in 3 French families is doing some version of what you just did. Stretching grain, mixing flour with things flour shouldn't be mixed with. Walk into markets in frozen conditions, watching the bread price and doing the impossible math. Watching the old ones and the very young ones to see which of them the winter will take. And the government of Louis XVI, which is trying, genuinely trying, and also genuinely failing, is doing what governments do when they're overwhelmed. It's issuing edicts, buying grain from abroad, trying to direct distribution, writing reports. The reports are good, actually. The intendants send detailed reports back to Versailles. They know how bad it is. They describe it with precision. The percentage crop failure in each generality, the bread prices by region, the number of riots, over 300 grain disturbances in France between 1788 and 1789, 300 Etampes bakeries, 300 crowds of hungry, people pushing through doors that weren't locked, 300 women in blue headscarves counting out 15 sous, 300 stewards named de Villiers backing away from the weight of their own leverage. And what the reports don't capture, what numbers can't capture, is the internal shift. The thing that happens to a person who has been hungry enough, long enough, to understand in their body, not just in their mind, but in their stomach, their hands, their bleeding gums, that the arrangement is wrong, not unfortunate, not bad luck, wrong. That the hailstorm was not the point. The hailstorm was just weather. The point is what came after the hailstorm, the price of salt, the miller's toll, the grain going to Paris, the Vicomte's contract taking the white bread before the villagers could buy the dark, the hundreds of small arrangements that had worked tolerably well in good years and failed catastrophically when a single summer storm knocked out the harvest. This is what starves a country, not the storm, the system that couldn't survive the storm. And once you've felt that, once you've held it in your body through a whole winter, once you've carried it through the cold and rationed it with the seed grain and watched it taken from you a bassart toll at a time, you don't put it down when the weather gets better. You carry it with you to whatever comes next. The last night of April, you're in bed. The straw mattress that has been your whole world since November is itself again just a mattress, a place to sleep, not the centre of a survival calculation. The blanket is enough. The coat is folded on the stool. Outside the window, the apple tree in the yard is in blossom. 3 days ago, nothing. 2 days ago, the first flowers. Now, on the 4th day of blossom, the whole tree is white, and the smell of it comes through the gaps in the window shutter like a rumour of summer. Apple blossom. After everything. Marie is asleep already. Her breathing is even, slow. She looks like herself again. The weight the winter put on her face has eased slightly, lifted by 3 weeks of spring and better food, and the absence of the specific tension that ran through this house from November to March. Your mother is still up. You can hear her below, moving quietly through the end of her evening routine. The clink of a pot, the scrape of her stool, then silence. The house breathes around you. Your body is tired in a different way than the winter tired. This is work tired, outdoor tired, the ache of muscles that have been re-engaged after months of survival-only mode. The ploughing, the planting, the carrying. Your shoulders have a good ache in them. Your hands have the tiredness of use rather than the tiredness of cold. You close your eyes. The apple blossom smell drifts through the shutter and finds you in the dark. You think about Père Gaudin. You hope he's in the heaven Père Villeneuve described at the funeral, the particular heaven of an old priest who was kind to people without making a performance of it. Warm, probably with enough food, with teeth good enough to eat chestnuts. You think about the watercress, how you stood at the edge of the creek with freezing hands pulling it from the water, and how eating it raw on the way home tasted like the first thing you'd eaten in weeks that was exactly what your body needed. You think about the woman in the blue headscarf. You think about 15 sous on a counter, one at a time. You think about the notebook of grievances. Somewhere in Paris those notebooks are being compiled, sorted, read maybe, by men with wigs and ink-stained fingers, translating the plain language of Vrigny-le-Sec into the formal language of the Estates General. The specific turns into the general. The turnip becomes principle. The bread price becomes liberty. Or not. You don't know. You can't know. You know your fields. You know the rye is green. You know the potatoes are coming up. You know that if the summer is normal, just an ordinary French summer without hail or drought or early frost, you'll have enough, maybe more than enough, maybe enough to put a little by for the next bad year whenever it comes. Because it will come. This is the knowledge the winter gave you, the knowledge under all the other knowledge. The bad year will come. The question is not whether it comes, but what you are and what you have when it arrives. You have more now than you had in October, not money, not grain, not much of anything you can put in a box. What you have is the knowledge of what you can endure, what it actually feels like to go through it and come out the other side. The specific geometry of getting through a bad winter, where the room for compromise is where there is none, when to sell and when to hold, when to go to a tamp and when to stay home, when to eat the last of the Calvados and when to save it for later, when to follow a woman in a blue headscarf through a door, when to stand on a hill and look at the smoke above the horizon that might be Paris. Sleep is close now, the way it comes after real tiredness, not gradually but with a kind of authority, not asking, just arriving and taking over, the consciousness dimming at the edges first, the thoughts becoming less sequential, less insistent, more associative, drifting, the apple blossom smell, the weight of the blanket. Your hands relaxed now, open on the mattress, the healed skin of them, the small remaining ghost of frostbite on the left little finger. This is enough. These hands, this room, this family breathing around you in the dark, warm enough, safe enough, alive enough. The winter proved these things are not permanent. Nothing is permanent. The cold came and stayed and left. The bread ran low and stayed low and slowly rose to something like adequate. The fields were dead and came back. Things end. Not the way you want them to. Not when you need them to. But they end. The sounds of the village outside, muffled by the warming air, are different than they were in January. Spring sounds. A frog from somewhere near the creek. The particular call of an owl in the oak stand. Wind in leaves that weren't there 3 weeks ago. Not the wind of the winter Beauce. The empty, pitiless wind that came off the frozen north and brought nothing. A spring wind, carrying warmth and the smell of turned earth and apple blossom. You sink. Centuries will pass. The Vrigny-le-Sec, you know, will change beyond recognition. The Roman road will become a national highway, then a highway numbered and marked on maps. The fields will be mechanically harvested, the labour of 30 men replaced by a machine that does it in an afternoon. The mill will become a ruin on the creek that hikers pause to photograph. The winter of 1788 will become a chapter in books, a data point in histories of the French Revolution. A graph showing bread prices against riot frequency, a neat relationship between economics and upheaval that historians will argue about for the next 2 centuries. The notebooks of grievances, the cahiers de doléances, will be archived in Paris, boxed and catalogued. Some of them digitized in the 21st century, available to anyone with an internet connection. The plain handwriting of village lawyers and educated farmers rendered into pixels. Someone in the 22nd century will search the archive and find Vrigny-le-Sec's notebook, read Guillaume's handwriting, see the list, the gabelle, the tile, the bread price, the miller's toll. We'll feel, for just a moment, something of the weight of it. Because the hunger doesn't change. The specific hunger of the winter of 1788 is gone. But the human hunger, the hunger for enough, for fair, for the math to add up at the end of the week, that doesn't change. The human heart doesn't change. The need for a warm room at the end of a hard day and something in the stomach and enough for tomorrow, that doesn't change. The need for rest. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it takes Jean-Pierre Moreau in his attic room in the spring of 1789, with the apple blossom smell and the owl in the oak stand and the distant sound of a frog that means the creek has thawed. That means the winter is over. That means the world has survived another season of being tested and is greening again in the dark. Let the cold go. Let the hunger quiet. Let the weight of the winter, held through every morning before dawn and every count of the coins and every bread that wasn't quite bread, let it settle down. You've carried it. You've earned the putting down. The winter is over. The seeds are in the ground. Tomorrow the rye will be one day greener. Tonight, rest. Let the thoughts slow. Let the sounds soften. Let the darkness be what it is. Just darkness. Just the absence of light. Not the darkness of cold and scarcity and 3 months of not enough. Just the ordinary dark of an ordinary night in an ordinary village in France where someone is sleeping in April. Just rest. Let it come. Warm enough. Safe enough. Alive. That's enough. That's everything. Good night.